Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my NACL 2024 Spring Split Primer and Power Rankings video. It's finally time for the NACL to start up. Obviously, I'm very excited. This is one of my favorite regions, or I guess leagues to cover in all of the world, and it's the reason that I kind of go out of my way to cover it instead of just covering the four major regions. I care a lot about the NA ecosystem, and obviously, the NACL rocks. Like, anybody who watches the games realizes that this is probably the most fun league to watch in the world, especially now that it's going to best of 3 Fearless Draft. That's going to be an absolute blast. But in today's video, we're here to give you the primer on everything you can expect from the NACL in the Spring Split in 2024. That's going to include breakdowns of all 10 teams. That's going to include power rankings and expectations for those 10 teams. I do have some housekeeping that I want to get out of the way before we jump into the video itself, but first, we put a lot of time and effort into these primer videos, and I usually don't ask for this at the beginning. I usually wait towards the end of these videos to ask for this, but if you're enjoying yourself, 15, 20, 30 minutes into the video, it really would mean a lot to me if you hit the like button. You don't have to do it now. I'm never going to ask anyone to like it before you've seen the content, but if you find yourself enjoying some of the breakdowns and some of the analysis, then hit that like button, hit subscribe. We're posting a lot over the course of this year, just like we did the last couple of years on this channel. So without further ado, let's get into some of the housekeeping. I don't want this to be a ridiculously long intro segment, but I do have to set some, ground rules for what the format is that we're going to be going over. This video is going to have a little bit in it for everybody, I would say. If you are a newbie, if you're somebody who's not familiar with the NACL or Tier 2 in North America, but maybe wants to start investing, especially now that Fearless Draft is here, maybe given a reason, you're on Live Patch and it's Fearless Draft, this video is for you. I'm going to be going over every single team, their expectations, all of the players, so you have a good idea of what you can expect when you watch their games. But also, obviously, if you're a big fan of the NACL, this is also for you. I'll be giving my power rankings on all 10 of these teams. I'll be giving some, analysis that may not be as, consistent with every other analyst that you're going to see on the internet. Some of my takes are going to be my takes, and that comes from, personal opinion, but that is another big housekeeping thing. This is, at the end of the day, just my opinion, and even more so for the NACL than for any of the other leagues that we've covered on this channel up until this point. These power rankings and player rankings that I'm going to get into in this video are all super flexible and super variable. If you have a disagreement with a player or a team or any kind of ranking in this video, I'm really not going to push back on it, even if it's like a massive difference. I wouldn't normally say that, even for like, when we talked about the LCS, yesterday, I was like, oh, a 2 or a 3 spot difference isn't all that much, but honestly, like an 8 spot difference in the NACL isn't all that much. This league is about development. You can expect players to be very different from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and that's kind of what you're hoping for. You're hoping to see a lot of these players either grow or, figure something out as we go throughout the year. You're hoping to see some of the players that are near the bottom of this ranking end up changing and getting better, learning a lot, and growing as players. And so when I say that this is just my opinion, I really mean that, and even more so than the rest of these, this is going to be a floor ranking. Essentially, instead of treating this like a power rankings like I kind of did for the other regions, I think it's more apt to treat this as almost a confidence ranking, if you will. The teams at the bottom aren't necessarily the teams that I think are going to do worse, and the teams at the top aren't the teams that I'm guaranteeing are going to do best. Rather, I'm going to try and rank them in this video on who is most likely to be good and who has more to prove, I guess, who has a higher floor. It doesn't have anything to do with ceiling. We will talk about ceiling as we talk about each individual team when we get to the breakdown and the analysis, but I want to make that clear. Even more so than the other videos, this is a floor ranking. There are going to be teams that I really believe are going to do better than the rankings that I have in this video, but in terms of just proven commodities, this is kind of that order in terms of that. So that's kind of the prerequisites, the housekeeping, as I said, out of the way. I really do appreciate you guys sticking around, but it's time to jump into the video itself. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go from number 10 to number 1 in my confidence rankings, talking about every single team, talking about every single player. Not only are all the teams ranked from 10 to 1, all of the players are ranked from 10 to 1 in their positions as well, so we'll be going over all of them in the context of the NACL, and that means we get to start it off with number 10 in the power rankings for me. And coming in at number 10, it's going to be one of our newly promoted teams. It's going to be LiT Esports. And Like I said, this is a pretty good encapsulation of what I was talking about in terms of the housekeeping, in terms of this is a confidence and floor ranking rather than a ceiling ranking, because honestly, I don't think this team is really going to be all that bad this year. I don't think they're going to guaranteed be the 10th place team in the league, but it would just be really difficult for me to say that I trust them more than I trust a lot of the other teams that are in the league. They are the team with the least amount of proven commodities, and that's why they come in at number 10, but they qualified out of the qualifiers very easily for a reason. They were the best team in the qualifiers, and nobody predicted that going into it. That was one of the biggest surprises that we could have possibly had, but they're able to retain not one, not two, not three, not four, but all 5 members from that qualification team, which is really big. So let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Dragoon in the top lane, Kizno in the jungle, Messages in the mid lane, Rock Boom at AD carry, and Plux at support. A lot of the tape that I ended up watching for this team was the qualifiers. Obviously, they did a lot before this, and a lot of these players I was, familiar with before, LiT came around. But I think in terms of talking about them as a group of 5, it was important to watch basically all of the qualifiers and just see, or the main qualifiers, I should say, the promotion series, and just kind of see where their strengths and weaknesses lie. And honestly, I was really impressed with the individual mechanical skill of a lot of the players. We knew that some of these guys were really good. Dragoon has been a player that's been very good for a long time, but he was awesome during that series. Messages is a player I'm very impressed with. Kizno is a very good player. Rock Boom is a player that I was familiar with. Plux is the only player to have played at the NACL level, before this split. And so there's a lot going for this team, but when you look at the rankings, you look at the numbers, and I guess I can kind of explain what you see on your screen. Not a great example in terms of, what to expect for the rest of these, but you can see the spring and summer split records and rankings that they had, on there. Obviously, LiT promoted, qualified here for the NACL in 2024. They did not play in the NACL in 2023, so nothing to put there. Season finals is just where they finished in the playoffs in summer, and trending is whether or not they're moving up or down, in my power rankings compared to their end of year placement from last year. LiT obviously kind of moving up. I have them, with the same here because they are still last place in the NACL, but obviously, moving into the NACL in the first place is a really big positive, but we'll talk about these players individually. Dragoon was somebody I was really impressed with. Obviously, he's been in this scene for such a long time, and I'm really happy to finally see him get a shot here in Tier 2. It feels like so many orgs have been able to, bring him in, and he helps them tremendously, and then they move on from him. Obviously, Supernova last year, him qualifying into the summer split, and then, getting replaced on that team with Quacker in the top lane wasn't exactly ideal, but it's great to see him finally get a shot here at Tier 2, and honestly, I think he's going to be able to keep up relatively well. The only reason, again, he's coming in at number 10 is, first of all, I think top lane is a very deep role in the NACL. It is in every single region, but, it's one of the best in the NACL, and, it's really tough to be able to kind of break through without having played a game at this level, but, there are some concerns in terms of, is he going to be able to hold up now playing against, really, really good top laners and, like, LCS caliber top laners, because that's really what the NACL is full of right now. We're going to have to see as we go on. I think he's going to be fine, especially going up against some of the players that maybe he was playing against talent-wise in Tier 3, in the qualifying series and places like that, but, it's definitely going to be intriguing to see how that transition ends up going, because I think we've all been waiting on it for a really long time. Then you've got Kizno in the jungle, and honestly, I'm very excited to see how he's going to do. He's very new to the competitive, League of Legends scene. He only started playing competitive in 2023, last year. This is his second year playing as a competitive, pro, not even a full-time pro here, and, it's really impressive for him to be able to be here, but remember, he also was on that Supernova team that qualified in the summer split, or I guess at the end of spring into summer of last year, and he also got replaced on that team, and so he definitely also has something to prove, but for somebody who's been in pro for so little time, it's very impressive how well he commands the map in the early game. I think that's something that is obviously very important in the current meta, and I'm interested to see if he's going to be able to do that at the same level in the NACL. What we've seen so far is good, but not really much to say outside of that. Then you've got Messages in the mid lane. I really like Messages. I think mid lane, as we're going to find out, in my opinion, is probably the least deep position, or at least the least, guaranteed, good position in the NACL. I think it's pretty wide open. There are a lot of mid laners that are going to be fighting for, top 5, top, 6-ish, mid lane spots. I think top 4 is pretty locked in, but top 5, I think, is basically all open. 5 to 10 feels very much just whoever you want to put there. I have messages coming in at 9. He's one of the 2 NACL mid laners that's not played at this level before, but I have a little bit more faith that his floor is a little bit higher because, man, he was just so good in the qualifiers, in the promotion series. He was actually, like, really, really fun to watch. There was a Jace game that he played, I believe it was against Supernova, that he just absolutely popped off on. It was really, really fun to watch him. He's a really interesting prospect. I think he's probably one of the players that I would expect to have high upside on this team, and I would expect them to want to play through him. But, you know, top side of the map, I think in general, is really good. I think Dragoon and Messages are very good solo laners, and Kisno has shown a lot of really good tape at a lower level. It's definitely going to be interesting to see if it translates, but top side of the map, I think, is a lot of fun. And then you've got Rockboom and Plux in the bot lane. Rockboom obviously coming in, you know, right before, essentially, the qualifier, or right at the end of the qualifiers, right before the promotion series for LiT here. And, you know, I'm not going to say I'm concerned, because I'm not concerned about him, but it's certainly going to be interesting to see if he is going to, you know, be really good at this level. I think his mechanics are solid. I think, you know, he hasn't necessarily had an opportunity to shine in the same way. I've been familiar with him for a while because of a lot of these qualifiers, you know, watched him a lot in the spring split, but it's going to be interesting. I didn't expect him to be their starting AD carry. It felt like, I don't want to say that, you know, the situation surrounding LiT was weird in the offseason, but, you know, it's definitely cool to see them bring back all 5, including him, because he was a big piece of why they were able to win. He was a bit more weak side during that tournament, but, you know, I think he can play, you know, strong side. We've seen it in the past, and so it's definitely going to be interesting to see what ends up happening in the bot lane, because you are pairing him up with Plux, who is the only player here with actual NACL experience, playing last spring for CLG Faith. That team obviously didn't do much and wasn't very good. He was a last-minute replacement. He wasn't even supposed to really be on the team in the first place, but he ended up playing the entire split for them, and he was fine. He's going to come in at number 9 in terms of the support rankings for me. Obviously, Plux is a big name. He's somebody who has really dominated tier 3 in the past. You know, a couple of years ago, he was a really big support prospect in North America, and so it's going to be interesting to see, you know, with the growth that this team made over the course of, you know, the qualifiers and into the promotion series, whether or not that growth has carried over. But he has good synergy with players like Dragoon, who he's played with a lot over the course of the last few years, and, you know, I would expect that to be a positive. There's a reason he's not coming in at number 10 for me in the support rankings. That experience is valuable, but I think this team in general, as you can see from the rankings, does still have a lot to prove. As much as I like the upside, especially of the top side of the map, you know, you're really going to have to show that you're good enough to be able to make that transition as a group of 5. Obviously, beating Supernova was big at the end of last split, but you're not just playing Supernova. Now you're playing, you know, Team Liquid challengers and FlyQuest challengers and Disguised, and, you know, a lot of these really, really good teams at the top of the standings that are absolutely going to, you know, be different than anything else that you've played against. I have faith that this team is going to be able to, at the very least, keep up a little bit against a lot of these other teams, but until they prove it, there's really no other place for me to put them than at number 10 in the power rankings. Moving on to number 9 in the power rankings, it's a fun team, a fun org, certainly a fun showcase that they gave off last year, but this year I think their team is looking a little bit more concerning, but I think I am a tad bit higher on them than maybe the consensus is at the moment. I've got Wildcard Gaming coming in at number 9. I think a lot of people have this team last or close to last in their power rankings. I certainly don't think that that is fair going into the year. I think specifically there are a couple players on this team, 2 players on this team that I feel pretty good about, and it's not like all 5 players are disasters by any means. I feel really good that there's going to be 2 players that are at least solid at this level, and the other 3 I think really could be very good at this level, as everybody in the NACL could be good at this level. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup's looking like Quacker in the top lane, Winnie in the jungle, Darkwings in the mid lane, Aaron at AD carry, and Doxa at support. A lot of experience on this team, especially considering that they're coming in at number 9 here. 4 of the 5 players on this team played in the NACL last year. Everyone except for Aaron had some time in the NACL last year, and Aaron's a good prospect. He's a player that I like quite a bit, and so, you know, we'll talk about him in a second, but we'll get to the, you know, established players first, starting with the top side here with Quacker, and I like Quacker. I thought his development over the course of last year was really astounding. He was by far the best player on his team last year. He really was the one that was kind of pushing Supernova forward, you know, keeping them in games, keeping them relevant, especially in the NACL, and, you know, things didn't end up working out. I don't think the rest of the roster was necessarily good enough to be able to supplement that, but Quacker is a solid player, and he's more than deserved his spot here in the NACL. Again, top lane's pretty stacked, so he only comes in as the number 7 top laner for me, but he has the potential to climb even higher. His laning in particular is ridiculous. He was genuinely one of the better top laners in the NACL last year, and I could absolutely see that continuing over into 2024. And then the other player that I feel pretty good about in terms of floor is Darkwings in the mid lane. You kind of know what you're going to get from him, although he can be inconsistent from a week-to-week basis. At least you know that over the course of an entire split, you're probably going to get a pretty good, result from Darkwings. I like him. I think generally, like I've said, the mid lane pool in the NACL is good. It's maybe not as established as you would like. There's a lot of players that I think are solid and not necessarily superstars, except at, maybe the top 4. But to me, Darkwings comes in as the best of the rest, if you will, of a lot of that mid lane cluster from 5 to 10. I think Darkwings is the best of them. That's why he is coming in as my number 5 mid laner. I think you're going to be able to win a lot of games through Darkwings over the course of this year, specifically because you're bringing in Winnie, who obviously he played with last split, which is, good. It's always nice to have that mid-jungle synergy. I talk about that a lot on this channel, but Darkwings is a big reason why I'm more excited about this team. Quacker is another big reason why I'm more excited about this team's floor than maybe some other people are at the current moment. You have Winnie in the jungle. Winnie obviously has been around for quite a while. He's played in tier 2 for a long time. He's played for, TSM in the past. Obviously last year he was playing for AOE, and, AOE was generally fine. Him and Darkwings, I think, had relatively okay chemistry. I'm not as sold that Winnie is like a superstar jungler. I'm gonna need to see him be a little bit better than he was last year. I think Darkwings definitely took a lot of the spotlight away from the mid-jungle duo, but, Winnie's obviously a solid player at this level, and you're more than happy to have him be the one that's facilitating these 3 interesting lanes. And then you get to the bot lane, and the bot lane actually is very interesting as well, in my opinion. I like Aaron a lot. I think he's a very, very interesting ADC prospect, obviously the one player on this team that hasn't had a ton of NACL or Academy tier 2 experience, if you will, but his upside is absolutely there, and I think he is somebody that is very versatile in how he wants to play the game. You don't need to play strong side bot with Aaron, which I think is something that, isn't necessarily, all that common in the NACL. A lot of NACL teams like playing towards bot lane, and Wildcard very much has the potential to do that as well, because Aaron can play strong side, but he's a really good weak side bot laner as well. Just a very versatile player, can play a lot of different styles in the bot lane role, like whether that's, as a typical AD carry or something more off meta. He's just very flexible, and I think that's going to help this team out a lot. I actually like him a bit, but I am a bit concerned about Doxa in the support position. Doxa was a very feast or famine player on TSM last year in the spring split when he was playing mid lane for them. They brought him in, and obviously he was a last minute replacement. There were a lot of things that, went wrong in the preseason that caused them to have to go a different direction in the mid lane. So Doxa ended up stepping in, and, there were games where he was fine, but there were also a lot of games where he wasn't fine. And after that, I really didn't see a lot of him over the course of last year. Obviously watched some tape from him at the Immortals Winter Showcase. I couldn't find the words there. At the Immortals Winter Showcase that obviously all of SLU ended up playing in, and obviously this is SLU. It's just kind of adopted here into Wildcard for the NACL, but I think Doxa is a player that I'm not going to say I'm concerned about, but I think if Aaron is going to play more weak side, then maybe it won't be as much of a problem. You can have Doxa roam around the map. He's just, kind of inexperienced at support, or at least I don't really know what to expect from him. So for now, he's going to come in at number 10, and if you are looking at a reason to be concerned about this team and their projection going into 2024, it is the bot lane, if only because it's more of an unknown. I feel pretty good about the top side of this map. I feel very good about the solo laners, and Winnie, I think, is stable enough as a jungler at this level for you to be fine, especially because him and Darkwings do have, synergy and experience playing together on AOE last split. But if this bot lane can step up and actually be a really strong, isolated 2v2 or PowerPoint of the map that you want to play through, I think that's really, really good for Wildcard. That's going to be what separates them from the other teams near the bottom here. You don't want to be a bottom 2 team by the end of the year. I'm not sold that Wildcard is definitely going to be that. I know a lot of other people see them in a little bit of a different light, but I do think this team has pretty considerable upside, especially on the top side of the map, and, I think they could be very interesting. I dropped them to number 9 in my power rankings very recently. They were number 8 and 9 ended up switching for me basically right before I recorded this video, because it's a floor ranking. I have to rank for floor, and I do think Wildcards is a bit lower than maybe some other teams, but I do think their ceiling could potentially be higher, especially if Aaron in particular is really good. And now moving on to number 8 in the power rankings. This is again a team that I originally had lower, but I just couldn't justify it. I think their upside is too high. Even if their floor is lower than Wildcard's, which I do think it is, I think their upside is just too good to ignore. And this is a prime example. I want to preface this. This is a prime example of a team that I think will overperform the ranking that I've given them, but it is a floor ranking. This is a confidence ranking rather than a power ranking, and I do think that this team has a lot to prove. It's Cincinnati Fear, and I would love to put this team higher. I really, really would, because I do believe in this team, and I believe that most of these players are going to outperform the rankings that I've given them in this video, but for now, this is just about as high as I can put them in terms of, you know, just raw floor and expectation. It's a lot of hoping that players end up continuing to grow, and I do think those players will continue to grow because I do think they brought in the right players, but it is still something that I have to see with my own eyes with this group of players before I'm willing to just completely say that, yes, you've got it, it's guaranteed. And so let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Philip in the top lane, Chad in the jungle, Toasty in the mid lane, Lenz at AD carry, and Daption at support. I think it's a very versatile roster, and obviously Fear knows a thing or two about overperforming expectations. Even when they were good last year, nobody thought they were, you know, a team that, you know, could take down Team Liquid and potentially make finals in the NACL. I mean, it was very, very close to them being a finals team in the NACL. They weren't quite able to get there, but I mean, it was ridiculously close. And so, you know, they know a thing or two about outperforming an expectation. I had them ranked, I think, second to last at the beginning of last year as well. I think I had them 16th out of 17 in my spring power rankings. And so, you know, hopefully this is a good omen. But, you know, for now, I think Fear has a lot to prove. I think a couple of the players that they brought in are really interesting prospects, really good young players that have a lot of mechanical, specifically mechanical upside. My worry is just the lack of experience that this team has in general at this level. We've seen teams like this come in and do really well. We've seen teams like this come in and really struggle early on, especially. And so it's all going to be really interesting to check out. But you do have three relatively veteran players on this team. You're bringing Philip back. He is the one player that is returning here from the team last year. And Philip's a good player. I don't know if I believe in Philip as like a superstar in the same way that I did at the beginning of 2023, where I was like, this guy was awesome for FlyQuest in the LCS. He was dominating players like Whippo on a regular basis, or at least keeping up with them. You know, I was really kind of pro his laning in particular, and, you know, the impact that he could have isolated in the 1v1, but I do think it was a little bit more shaky a lot of times last year. There were times where he was a bit more inconsistent, but at the same time, there also were times where he was just dominant. He did become a bit of a Renekton one-trick down the stretch. I don't think that was the fault of him, more so just the direction that the team wanted to play. I'm not going to, you know, like, mark him for that too much. I'm not going to take away points too much from that, but, you know, I do want to see Philip kind of reclaim that spot. I want to give him this number 5 spot and then watch him prove that he's number 1 rather than give him number 1 and watch it the other way around. I think that would be more comfortable for me, especially because, like I've said, in every, you know, team up until this point already, top lane is stacked in the NACL. It's hard to break through on the top side of the map, and Philip being at 5 is a good example of that. He could win you could win a championship very easily with Philip in the top lane. You're also bringing Lenz in here. He is the only other player who played last year in the NACL, or at least in Tier 2. And Lenz is the other player that I feel really good about. I thought he grew a lot last year. Basically every single game, it felt like Lenz was getting better and better. I talked about it a lot in the weekly reviews. Really happy to see him come in here. I think him and Daption are going to be a really interesting bot lane to watch, because I really like Daption. I think as a, you know, rookie, quote unquote, as a, you know, unproven Tier 2 talent, he's a really good one, and I guess we'll get into him now. I didn't mean to just skip over Lenz, but, you know, basically the example of give an AD carry an inch and he'll take a mile. He's a very good laner, but he's even better at being able to snowball leads out of control. He's a very good game finisher, and that's not something you see all that commonly in the AD carry role. Sometimes you really wait and expect the rest of the team to be able to step up and, you know, try and make that work, but I thought he did a really good job of that last year. That was something that I was really impressed with. But for Daption, his lane partner here, a lot of the tape that I watched, at least in the offseason, to try and get an idea for what to say in this video was UST tape, and obviously UST is a really good program, and he had really good players around him, but even then, it felt like he was definitely standing out in terms of what they were able to accomplish. I really like his aggressiveness, and I think him and Lenz together as a duo could be very scary to end up going into, because Lenz capitalizes on his support's aggressiveness very well. It was something he did well with Donbray, especially towards the end of last year, and I think this will be a better version of that bot lane, so I'm very excited, but I can't put Daption anywhere above 8, if only just because we really haven't seen him at this level yet. Again, I pump the brakes on players that you just don't know. You know, sometimes you know, but sometimes you don't know, and I feel pretty good that he's going to be good, but this is just kind of a floor ranking, as I said. I think this is relatively fair in that aspect. But if there is, a part of the team that, is going to be a little bit more of a prove it to me, it's going to be the mid-jungle duo. And I know a lot of people might be, not confused, but maybe a little bit taken aback by how low I have Chad in my jungle rankings. I think other analysts and other players are going to have him ranked a bit higher. I want to make it clear that I do like Chad as a player. I've just, I have a history on this channel of, not necessarily being as into Immortals players as other analysts were. I thought that team was pretty interesting as a unit, but, I was never really all that individually impressed with Chad. He would have good games here and there, and then he would have bad games here and there, and I just want to see more consistency. Obviously, the qualification on Mirage is really good, and going back and watching those games, he was a really important part of that team, and an important part of what they wanted to do, and I think he has gotten better since the last time he was in the Academy League or the NACL, but I do want to see that development on the stage or in, the NACL in Tier 2 before I just anoint him. Again, it's a lot of, I think they're going to be better, but I don't know that they're going to be better than some of the players that I have listed above them. And so he comes in at number 9 for now. And then Toasty is the major question mark on this team. Toasty's a really interesting young mid lane prospect. He's got a ton of mechanical upside. I mean, in terms of laning prowess, he can kind of do it all. He's a very versatile player in terms of his champion pool, or at least what I saw felt very open and felt very, he was willing to kind of play a couple of different styles. Maybe, we'll see a little bit more of that once we get into the NACL, but there are also concerns when it comes to Toasty. He can sometimes get himself into trouble by playing a little bit too aggressive early on in games, and we've seen, very good Tier 3 mid laners come up and, be really aggressive at the lower level and just have it not be able to translate nearly as well. I'm thinking players like Robbie Bob, who are really, really good, at Tier 3 level, in qualifier level, in, collegiate level, and, you make that transition up to Tier 2, and it is a bit of a difference, especially in the mid lane, if you're not going to be consistent enough to be able to win like that every single game. I still like Robbie Bob, no flame to him, obviously, but, it's going to be interesting with Toasty. I think he's the most important piece on this team. If he shows up and he is actually like a top 5, top 6 mid laner in the NACL, which I certainly think is doable, that's going to completely change the outlook of this team, and they're absolutely going to outperform this number 8 ranking. It's just hard for me to say that. If jungle mid is good and aggressive and they win early and they're able to snowball games, that's going to completely change things, because honestly, when you're looking at this team, you're worried about finding a consistent carry, somebody that's going to be able to be played for every single game. Maybe that's Lens. I think you could play for Lens every single game, especially if they're winning isolated in the 2v2, which I think is more than possible. But if jungle mid ends up really working out for this team, if Chad and Toasty are really good as a duo, then I think that's another good avenue. Philip is going to be solid on the top side, especially isolated in 1v1 matchups when he gets champions that he feels comfortable on. There's just a lot of other question marks surrounding this team. I feel pretty good that a lot of those question marks will be answered after, 1 or 2 weeks into the season, but at least in the preseason here, when we're talking about, a little bit more of a confidence ranking, a floor ranking, I think Fear has to come in around number 8, at least for me. And now moving on to number 7 in the rankings, and like I said, a lot of the teams around this area are all of relatively similar skill sets, or skill levels, not skill sets, I should say, but this is probably one of the more interesting and fun ones to talk about. It's AOE Gold coming in at number 7 for me. Love this team. I love the way that they're constructed. I'm not sure it's going to work out 100% of the time. There are certainly concerns for me when it comes to whether or not this is going to be a top tier team in the NACL, but they're going to get wherever they get in a very fun manner. This is probably the single most aggressive team in the NACL, at least on paper, heading into 2024, and that certainly makes for a fun little bit of analysis here. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Zamudo in the top lane, Rosethorn in the jungle, Onat in the mid lane, Wixie at AD carry, and Breezy at support. Very excited to talk about this team because I think that honestly a lot of these players are underrated a bit by the community. I think especially the bot lane here, both members of the bot lane are players that I've kind of gone to bat for over the past couple of years. Specifically, Breezy is somebody who very much has been kind of a channel darling ever since I started talking about the North American leagues in like 2018 or so. He's basically always been a player that I've kind of gone to bat for and said is better than I think people think he is. I always thought he was an LCS caliber support at his absolute best, and there have been times where I was surprised that he wasn't getting call-ups, but now he's just turned into a very stable hand and presence to have in Tier 2 in the NACL, and I think he will continue to be that for AOE Gold. He's been good at basically every single stop that he has gone to, and that includes this one, so there's already a lot to like there, considering he is the one player that is returning from this AOE Gold team last year, but you're pairing him up with his former bot lane partner, Wixie. Obviously, these two haven't played together in a while. It's been since, I think, like the C9 amateur days back in the day, but they're together again, and both of them have kind of gone their, separate ways into getting here. Obviously, Breezy's been an NACL Tier 2 staple for quite a long time. Wixie's bounced around a bit more. He was in the 100 Thieves system, was in the Immortals system. He played for that Ginger Turmeric team that I talked so much about over the course of last year that kind of became what Wildcard was in 2023. He's kind of bounced around, but he's always looked really good, basically no matter where he has been. I'm excited to see him back into Tier 2, and honestly, this is the strong part of the team for me. This is the part that I feel the most confident on. I'm pretty confident Wixie and Breezy are going to be a pretty darn good bot lane. Do I think they're going to be top 2, top 3 guaranteed? I don't. I think that's a little rich in terms of a floor, but I feel like the floor of this bot lane is actually pretty high. Top 5 does not feel out of the realm of possibility, and top 4 in terms of teams in the NACL feel really locked, and so to be the best of the rest in that circumstance could be really big for AOE Gold, and honestly this bot lane I think will give them the chance to do better and to upset some teams that I think a lot of people might view as just straight up better than AOE, because I do think these two are going to work well together, but it's not like you're losing a lot of the edge and the competitive aggressiveness moving to the top side of the map. You've got Onat in the mid lane. I was more impressed by Onat than I thought I was going to be going into 2023. Not that he's a bad player, not that I ever thought he was a bad player, but he really showed up in Tier 2 and was like a genuinely good mid laner, was able to keep his own and hold his own, I should say, against most other mid laners at this level. He's going to come in at number 7 for me. I don't know if he is a star at this level just yet, but if he was by the end of this split, I'm not going to be entirely surprised. The trajectory has always been pointing up for him, and so it's really good to see him get another shot here, this time on AoE. You've got Zamudo in the top lane. I mean, you want the most aggressive top laner, maybe outside of Moose Hater in the North American system. Zamudo is absolutely that. He ranks a bit lower for me than he might some other analysts. Obviously, I think his mechanical talent is undeniable, but he will make some mental mistakes, and he does seem to not play as well when he has to play from a disadvantageous position. That's all I'll say from, what I saw in 2023. Obviously, we know he can be a really good player. We know he's somebody who can, actively change games, but, he can also change games for the worse. He's been pretty volatile at this level. If he can clean up some of those mistakes, maybe get a little bit more consistent throughout the rest of, the process, then I think that he's going to be just fine. I mean, technically speaking, he's just as good as anybody else in the NACL in a very stacked top lane role, but that opens up the door for me to talk about Rosethorn, and man, does he have a job ahead of him, because Zamudo is used to playing with pressure, Onat is used to playing with pressure, and Wixie is used to playing with pressure. This is certainly going to be an interesting, team to try and see how they balance it all out. Can Rosethorn, really supply enough resources, I guess I will say, to everybody else on this team in order to, get the most out of these players? That's going to be kind of the question going into the year for AOE. And not only just that, but is Rosethorn a good enough player to be able to do that in an accurate way? I like Rosethorn. I really liked him back in the day when he was on CLG. I thought he was really having a nice upward trajectory, but things kind of fell apart when he went to Golden Guardians. That team wasn't nearly as good as they probably should have been. They got better towards the end of the year, but, Rosethorn felt a little out of his depth. Taco last year was not very good, and Rosethorn was a bit of a part of that, and so, there are reasons to be at least a little bit concerned with, him being here, but at the very least, you have that synergy with Onat that, worked pretty well for you last year. It was all right, and then you've got really talented solo and side laners here. There's a lot of ways for this to go right, I think, for AoE. If everybody can mesh and gel together, I think this could be a very good team, but more so than a lot of the other teams we're going to talk about here in the NACL, I do worry about fit in terms of player, strategies and play styles amongst the team itself. I don't think it's going to be the end-all be-all. I certainly think that, they have enough talent to be able to overcome that, and, you got to trust the coaching staff, you got to trust the players to be able to adapt, but at least for now, again, taking a wait-and-see approach on this and waiting until I see this team really break out of its shell before I sit there and crown them as one of the better, I guess, non-top 4 teams in the NACL. And now moving on to number 6 in the power rankings, and this is a team that, honestly, I'm intrigued by quite a bit. There are definitely question marks just because of the longevity that it's been for some of these players since the last time they played at this level, but in terms of name power, this team has it. It's Mirage Alliance, and man, I really hope this team is interesting because they are very, very, very fun on paper. But let's quickly address kind of the controversy surrounding them. If you're not on Twitter, if you're not following, the scene, there is a bit of controversy at the beginning of the split because this is not what the roster was announced to look like at the beginning of the offseason. It was supposed to be Dardoch in the jungle, Prismal at support, which is where he played last, and then Scooped at AD carry. A really talented tier 3 ADC who's been getting ready for a little while and definitely, was interested in seeing what he was going to be able to do at tier 2, but I don't think they realized that Will was going to be available, so they go out and they get Will. They cut Scooped like 2.5, 3 weeks before the season starts, and they say it's due to performance reasons, and that sucks. I mean, to sign with a team, for them to cut you before you play a single game for them, and for that all to happen basically after all the other OQ teams have already been made and finalized, and now you're not even going to be able to play, in the open qualifiers in tier 3. This split, like, that's a disaster, and, Mirage should have absolutely handled that better. That is the only thing I will say on that subject. It's absurd that we should be even having that conversation, but I do understand, like, from a winning perspective, why they would want to do that. Not because Scooped is a bad player, but Will is truly one of those players that's really big to bring in. So I guess we'll talk about the team now. Their lineup is looking like Alorum in the top lane, Will in the jungle, RJS in the mid lane, Prismal at AD carry, and Dardoch at support. So, a lot of weird stuff going on here. Alorum in the top lane, I guess we'll start with him. He is one of the 2 players that qualified with Mirage to get here in the first place. Obviously, we talked about Chad, in one of the previous entries here for Fear, but Alorum and Dardoch were both a part of this team as well to be able to get them promoted, and, I think that both of them retaining here is really nice. Alorum is a player that I think has been really solid for a while. I compare him quite a bit to Dragoon. I think they're actually pretty similar. Both can carry, both can play weak side. It doesn't really need to be this, like, they don't need to be a major factor. They don't need to be a major resource gatherer on the map in order for them to be useful, and I think that that's a very valuable trait. He is going to come in at number 9 for me because it's been a while since he's played in tier 2, and again, like I said, top lane's just so stacked in the NACL. It's really hard to find a spot for somebody who has not played in the NACL in the last, year or two in anywhere in the top 8. Like, it's just really difficult because all of those players are, in some way, shape, or form, pretty established, and so Alorum being a really solid player is definitely still the case, but he is going to come in at number 9 for me. And then we'll talk about Dardoch now, because again, he is the other player who qualified here. Talk about a crazy kind of journey that he has been on. Obviously, the Prodigy jungle, coming up through Team Liquid in the LCS, having all of those issues when it comes to potential behavioral and character, off the rift problems that made him bounce around to team after team after team. He eventually was out of the LCS even after having, pretty good success in certain spots. And, he went back down to tier 2 and he was coaching for a bit on Immortals and, really helping out there, even, taking over full draft duties at times. And, all the while he's been transitioning to being a support player instead of a jungle player, although he was supposed to play jungle this split, and now he's back to playing support. It's been quite a journey for Dardoch, but it's really good to see him back into tier 2. He really is one of the NA legends, whether you want to consider him one of the best or not. He certainly is somebody who has been very important towards the NA story as a whole, and it's good to see him back. I think he's a good support. I'm not sure if he's going to be an elite support. That's why he comes in at number 6 for me. The hands are absolutely there. Like, you can see it even when he plays in lane. He's very good at being able to pressure out opposition. He knows matchups relatively well, but, a lot of the micro stuff throughout the game, that's something that he's still getting better at, and I think that that's something that he will continue to get better at. And then the rest of this roster is very intriguing. We'll start with Prismal, because we've already talked about his bot lane partner. I love Prismal. I've been such a Prismal fan over the course of me watching Tier 2, and, a couple of years ago, back in, 2021, around that time, I was just at the edge of my rope when Prismal was not getting call-ups after how good he was for teams like CLG and Golden Guardians, and it just was absurd that he wasn't, getting a call-up to the LCS. It felt like he had deserved it for a long time, but it ended up not happening. He ends up role swapping to support. He did play in the NACL last year for Golden Guardians Challengers in the spring split before, obviously, the retraction, was playing support for them, and he was pretty good. Obviously, he was one of the best supports in the NACL because he actually got his LCS call-up as a supporter, at least played a couple of games in that role, but as an AD carry, that's always where I felt like his strengths, were able to dominate. He is such a good laner, and he's such an oppressive player. I think that these two bot lane players and the bot lane duo, this bot lane duo on this team could be, one of the best in the entire league. I mean, this is the highest ranked player we've seen in terms of their position on this list so far, but I really believe that. Honestly, I had to fight myself not to put Prismal at number 1 because the last time we saw him play in Tier 2, he was the best AD carry, and it was by a pretty large margin. And so for him to come in pretty highly on this list, that's just how highly I think of him. And then you've got RJS in the mid lane. Now, this is certainly an interesting and fun conversation to have. I'm not going to sit here and say anything about RJS. I mean, you can talk about the memes and all the stuff on Twitter. It's not really all that relevant. That stuff is what it is, but as a player, he is a grinder. I mean, he has always been near the top, if not the top of games played. Whenever Champions Queue is out, obviously he plays a ton of solo queue. This guy loves League of Legends, and the last time he was in the NACL or Academy, I guess, for CLG a couple of years ago, I think it was 2021, he was pretty good. Honestly, he wasn't a dominating force. I liked him actually a bit more in the top lane, but that was because I think he was going up against worse talent in the top lane when he was playing there, but he's been a good mid laner for a while. I need to see him get, settled back in, I should say, into the NACL. It's definitely going to be an interesting story here to have him back, but he's going to come in at number 8 for me. There are a lot of variable mid laners, and he's going to come in like near the middle of the high variance mid laners in the pack right now. Has the potential to go up, has the potential to go down if things go terribly wrong, but for now, I think he's just going to find himself in kind of another wait-and-see approach for a player that has just not played professionally in a while. And then the one who caused a lot of this commotion, completely not his fault, by the way, is Will. What an awesome player Will is. Honestly, outside of Prismal, Will is probably my favorite player on this team, and Will might even be above Prismal in terms of my talent scale. Jungle's just a bit more stacked at the top, in my opinion, than ADC is. ADC is very deep in terms of how many good AD carries we have, but I don't know if there's a lot of great AD carries at the NACL level, like truly LCS caliber. There are a lot of LCS caliber junglers, and unfortunately for Will, that means he comes in at number 5, but he is a potential superstar. When we were talking about him in 2021, 2022, during his time on Dignitas, and then he goes over to 100 Thieves, I mean, we were truly talking about him like he was somebody who could change, the LCS, be the next Blabber coming out of the Tier 2. I truly said that about him, and he's continued to be a major positive wherever he has gone. Was on a pretty okay AOE Gold team last year, but a big reason why they were pretty okay was because of just how good he was in the jungle. He was that team. He was actively winning so many games. I talked about it every single week. He was a hard carry for them, and if he can be that again for Mirage, I think this team is better than AOE was last year, especially the bot lane. You've got a lot of positives. If RJS is really good, that's huge. Aloran, we know, is going to be solid on the top side. If Prismal and Dardoch are as good as I think they're going to be, I do think Mirage is actually going to be a pretty scary team to run into. This team is trending up in a really, really good manner for a team that just got promoted. I genuinely think that they can actively compete with basically anybody else in the NACL on any given day, as long as these players do live up to their potential, or their hype, I guess, their names. But, I think when you watch the tape, a lot of the good parts of them are still there. I know it's a lot of veterans, and, some people might be looking at it and being like, oh, where's all the new talent? But these are really strong players for Tier 2, and I think at least for now, it's going to lead into them winning, a few more games than maybe some people are expecting. And now moving on to number 5 in my power rankings, and this is where it starts to get a bit spicy because I've seen this team ranked incredibly low by a lot of other analysts, a lot of ones that I respect, so maybe I'm just too optimistic. But for me, coming in at number 5, it is going to be Maryville University, and I like this team. I get it that they didn't make a ton of changes and that they weren't, phenomenal last year, but I do think this team got better over the course of this year. I think they made the right changes. I think obviously you keep your young, developmental players here, the guys that did actually get better as the split went on, and you bring in some really high upside players that could potentially really be impacts. And I guess I'm just more, I think really it comes down to me being more optimistic about top lane than everybody else is, which we will get into. But their lineup is looking like Spyrax in the top lane, Iconic in the jungle, Get Back in the mid lane, Scary Jerry at AD carry, and Zyko at support. This is a really strong lineup on paper. I understand that people might not be nearly as high on, the bot lane as maybe I am, and Get Back gets a pretty nice rating here, if only because he's somebody who has been able to prove something at this level. He had a couple of really, really great games over the course of last split, even if they weren't consistent, but I think the new additions on the top side of the map are actually game changers for Maryville, and this could not you know, this could also not be their roster for the entire year. This is who they announced right now, but, you know, obviously it's Maryville. They've got like 12 people under contract, and, you know, at least a couple of them are really, really good players. You have options here, which we'll talk about at the end, but let's start with the players that are coming back, starting with Get Back, because he is getting back onto Maryville University in 2024. I don't know what I was going for there, but, you know, I think a lot of people will look at 6 and say that's way too high, and honestly, I kind of feel like that's way too high, but, I mean, truthfully, who are you putting above him right now? Are you putting Onat above him? I think that's fair, but I didn't feel like 100% doing that. Are you putting RJS above him? I think that's also potentially fair, but we just haven't seen RJS play competitively in 3 years. It's really hard to know what you're going to get out of him. Are you going to put either of the two people who have never played in the NACL above him? Well, I think he showed enough in Tier 2 last year to prove that he is a Tier 2 player. And, you know, no offense to Messages and Toasty, but I just don't think they've proven that just yet. Like, who below him do you actually put above him? That's really the question, which is why he comes in at number 6, but he is definitely a bit of a question mark because of the inconsistencies that he did show last year. It's kind of weird because his playstyle isn't particularly volatile. He'll just have good days and bad days, which is fine. You're allowed to have those, but I would love to see those start to get cleaned up. I thought he was a lot better towards the end of the split than he was at the beginning of the split, but, you know, we'll see. If that development, if that, you know, upward trajectory can continue, then I think he's going to be a pretty good mid laner here for Maryville. Then you've got Jerry and Zyko returning here in the bot lane. It's no secret that I was a big fan of them before 2023 summer, and, you know, they got their opportunity in the NACL. They definitely struggled a bit at times. Jerry, in particular, I think was a bit slow to be able to start taking over games, but similar to what I said about Get Back, it really felt like they got more comfortable as the year went on, whereas the top side of the map started losing, I think, a bit more as the year went on. I think the bot side actually started winning a bit more in isolation. They just couldn't do as much about it once they got there. Zyko, in particular, is a player that I've very much gone to bat for in the past, but I think Jerry could also be like a true difference maker at this level, mechanically speaking, if he can lock in. Both of them come in pretty low, both at 7 in terms of their positions. They're both pretty established as like okay enough NACL players. I could see them getting passed up by some of the players with less experience that are below them, but I could also see them rising in this list because I do think they have upside, and honestly, this bot lane is a big reason why I feel better about this team than a lot of other analysts do, is because I actually like these two players quite a bit, and I do think they will be better in 2024. You have Iconic in the jungle. Obviously, he's had a bunch of time, you know, higher levels than this. He's played in the LCS for Golden Guardians. He's been a really top player here in the Academy Tier 2 scene before. He's not the only jungler on this roster. We'll talk about it, you know, at the end, but, you know, there are a lot of options for jungle to be a strength for this team this year, and I think Iconic is going to be solid. 6 is probably his floor. He has been better than this in the past by a large margin. If he can get back to that, I think these lanes could really benefit a lot from having a player like Iconic on this roster, because I do think he is a solid jungler, and another reason why I think I'm higher on this team than maybe some other people. And then the real big reason why I'm higher is Spyrax in the top lane. You're not going to find another analyst that ranks him nearly as high in the top lane as I do, but he's going to come in as my number 3 top laner. We've seen this transition before at this level, and it almost always ends up going well. I think, you know, Bradley obviously is the recent example of a player that converted from mid lane to top lane and was a really big impact on the team. Even if he wasn't perfect all the time, he still was one of the more impactful top laners in the NACL. But even someone like RJS that we already talked about, you know, he went to top lane and things got better. I know top lane's a lot stronger now than it had been in recent years, but I believe in the mechanics that Spyrax has in general, and I think as long as he can adopt the champion pool necessary to play top lane at a high level, he's going to be able to do it, and I wouldn't expect him to be much worse than a top 3, top 4 top laner, unless he just can't pick up a lot of the champions. But that's why I'm high on this team, and like I said, there are options. You have Yuji on this roster. Yuji was my pick for the summer split MVP. I mean, Masu was awesome, and I love Masu. Trust me, I raved about him in the LCS video that I posted yesterday, but Yuji was awesome in summer as well. It was the best split of his entire career, and you've got him on this roster. He could very much slot in. He has experience playing with Spyrax, and let's say Spyrax is bad in the top lane and Get Back doesn't make that adjustment. You could always move Spyrax into the mid lane, and you have someone like PCL who is solid enough on this roster to be able to play. You have Niles as your head coach. You have somebody who can fill in here and play top lane. Maryville has so many different options that honestly, I would be surprised if this team was just a disaster. I think there is a world, because I do think 5 to 10 is all just kind of one big jumble. You know, it's kind of just a crapshoot, but I think this team's floor is a lot higher than people are saying it is. To me, they come in, you know, at the top of this pack at number 5. I believe in Spyrax, I believe in Iconic, I believe in Jerry and Zyko, and I think Get Back is good enough for you to be able to win with him in the mid lane. This is a very fun team, and I guess I'll just have to live with being higher on them than a lot of other people are. But now we get to move into the top 4, and as I've been kind of previewing throughout a lot of this video, the top 4 is kind of its own separate league in terms of what it offers at a lot of these positions and just as a unit as a whole. The top 4 are the top 4 teams, I think, in my opinion and a lot of other people's opinions, and it's definitely going to be a surprise in which order I put them in because it does not feel like it's consensus. Again, I'm not guaranteeing that these are going to go in this order. It's not even really a power rankings, just a confidence rankings, and to me, the team that is the most volatile in the top 4 is Team Liquid Challengers. I know a lot of people really like this roster. I know a lot of people are going to look at it and say that it's going to be the best in the NACL. I think that that's a reasonable, takeaway to have. But for me, I think there's reasons to look at this and be a bit concerned, even if I'm super optimistic about a couple of these players and a couple of these players and what they're going to offer over the course of this year. I think there is a better shot that they end up, first than they end up fourth. But at least in terms of just how this ended up grading out in terms of the confidence meter, to me, there's really only one place they can come in, and that is 4th place for me. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Jenkins in the top lane, Keel in the jungle, Roamer in the mid lane, Spawn at AD carry, and Kim down at support. We saw all of these players last year with the exception of Roamer in the NACL, and all of them, I think, played really well. A couple of these players, well, one of these players ended up playing in LCS last year. Another has played in LCS before, and the other two are really solid top-tier performers, Keel in particular coming off of his best split ever. And then you've got the best import of the offseason in terms of the NACL in Roamer. I think a lot of people are going to compare him to Eminus, from last year where Cloud9 ends up importing him. He spends a little bit of time in the NACL, but really the plan all along was just to make sure that there were no problems before he got called up to the main roster. I think there's a reasonable, prediction to say that that could be possible there in the LCS because they do have an import slot open. Roamer could be LCS bound, if he does end up playing well here, but this guy is ridiculous. If we're just talking about the NACL right now, Roamer to me comes in as the #1 mid laner in the NACL. His tape is actually absurd. He was one of the players in the LCK Challengers League, which obviously if you don't watch my other content, you wouldn't know. I do watch a lot of. I watch a lot of the Challengers League in my free time. I think it's also one of the most enjoyable leagues to watch in the world, but Roamer dominated that league. He was honestly my second favorite mid laner in the entire league last year, only behind Call Me, who, is obviously doing really well on Nongshim when he's been given an opportunity. And so for Roamer to come over here to NA, I think he could actually be a complete game breaker in a similar way to what Eminus was last year for Cloud9, although I think Roamer has the potential to be even better if everything goes right. I do agree with him starting here in Academy or in the NACL on Challengers because I do think that there are some concerns with whether or not, the volatility is too much. He's a very aggro player and he is going to flip some games, but his mechanical floor should honestly carry him through a lot of this part of the NACL and a lot of this part of North America. But the rest of the team is also really interesting. It's not just Roamer that makes me positive. Keel is part of the reason why I am a little bit lower on this team, but also why I'm higher on this team. I really went to bat for Keel over the course of 2023 and just how good he was playing. He was a monster last year, even on champions that, people said weren't a part of his, small champion pool or whatever people want to say about Keel. He was a lot more versatile and a lot more consistent than people thought last year, and I think he really deserved a lot of the flowers. He was an MVP, finalist for me in the summer split, and I truly think he deserved that. He gets a really big offer here to go to the Team Liquid organization that has been really good at developing talent like this and putting out winners, and so you have to believe that Keel's not only going to get better, but, is going to be able to repeat what he was able to do last year over a long period of time. But when you talk about potential weaknesses for the team and why it ends up falling lower here, Keel and Roamer are a part of that because, man, both of them are very volatile. Keel has been a very volatile player over the course of his tenure in the NACL, whether that's for CLG or, of course, for Wildcard last year. He has been a little bit of an up and down player, so if you're getting the ups from both of these players at the same time, they might even be the single best jungle mid duo in the NACL, but if you're getting the downs, it's going to be a lot more concerning, and I think that's a little bit more possible than people are giving it credit for. We'll talk about Jenkins really quick. It feels like I'm disrespecting him by putting him at 6, and this feels very low. Again, when you look at this in isolation, this feels very low, but then you look at the top laners that I'm placing above him, and it's hard to find a spot. Like, I originally had him at 4, and then I was like, there are a couple players that I want to put above him. Philip was one of them who I just thought had deserved it and earned it a little bit more in the last time that both of them were in the NACL, but there's another player that we'll talk about in a couple of slots here that I think has also done a little bit better than what Jenkins has done over the course of the last couple of years. But Jenkins has LCS experience. He's been in this organization before. He was actually, I believe, on the first ever Team Liquid Academy team in 2018 when they introduced kind of the Academy League and really, made it this whole thing. I think Jenkins was on that roster. He was kind of a rookie at that time. Maybe he was on Golden Guardians. It was one of the two. I don't remember, but, he's been in this organization before. He's been around the block. He knows what he needs to do. He's going to be fine on the top side. This is not a weakness, even though his number might project as such. And then you've got Spawn and Kim Down as your bot lane. Kim Down obviously being the one member to return here from this Challengers team last year. He's solid. I'm not going to say he's a star. He definitely has his bad performances, but he's another player that I thought got better as the year went on last year. I think him and Arrow definitely split time being good. It was very funny. I was talking about that bot lane where it was like they would go through phases where, during one period of time, Arrow would be carrying games and Kim Down would feel like a hindrance in the support position. And then in another, Kim Down would be absolutely destroying games, moving around the map, being a huge positive, and Arrow's positioning would be miserable. It felt like it was impossible to get these two to play well at the same time. But, it's going to be interesting with them bringing Spawn in because, yeah, Spawn comes in as my number 180 carry, and that's going to make some people upset. I know he's not the flashiest guy in the world, but to me, I think everything he has proven at this level is to be a fantastic player. He dominated for Dignitas at the end of the year when he finally got put back down into the NACL. I've already talked at length on this channel about why he failed so heavily in the LCS, but, to sum it all up very quickly for those who don't watch my other videos, he was kind of put in a position to fail. He had Santorin and Jensen as his mid-jungle duo, probably the most passive mid-jungle duo in the entire league in the early game, and Spawn is also a pretty passive player. He's somebody who likes to scale into the late game. He likes to play that more team fight, phase. He likes to be weak side, honestly, in a perfect situation, and that's just not what that team needed at the time, and so obviously he goes back down to Dignitas Challengers. He makes the finals on that team, being one of the best AD carries in the league. Doesn't get a job super quickly into the summer split, but does land up on Taco, which is an okay circumstance, but he was by far the best player on Taco last split. It was really feeling like he was winning all of their games for him, and so for him to finally get back onto a genuinely good team here, I think he's going to make it work, and especially because I think mid-jungle is so volatile and so resource-heavy, to have Spawn, who is this very low resource, very consistent AD carry, I think really does stabilize a lot of what Team Liquid wants, and especially because I don't think there are any guaranteed superstars in the AD carry position right now in the NACL. Spawn's consistency and his ability to win that he has shown at this level for many years is going to put him at the number 1 spot. So you're looking at this talent level and you're probably wondering why they come in at 4, but again, this is a confidence ranking, and Keel and Roamer as your jungle mid duo just worry me a bit, especially if Roamer is going to get called up, and I'm not saying APA would come down and be bad. APA would also come down and probably be the number 1 mid laner in the NACL, but we'd have to see that, and especially because APA wouldn't have a ton of time to practice with the rest of this team, I think it would be interesting. I shouldn't factor all that in. I should factor in just the 5 that we see now, but it's hard not to think about it because it's been floated around so much, even by people around the org itself, and so for now, because of the worries that I have that, maybe Roamer is not as good as maybe I think he is, or maybe that crazy volatile style that he and Keel have will go back to bite them. Maybe Jenkins is just fine in the top lane. Spawn's not really someone that saves a bad team. He's just someone that makes a good team look better. There are reasons to believe that this could theoretically go wrong, but like I said, I think it's a lot more likely that this team is very good, one of the best in the entire league, than they are complete trash or anything like that. And that's going to bring us to number 3, and if you were surprised by number 4, then you're probably also going to be surprised by number 3, because coming in at number 3 for me, it is going to be FlyQuest Challengers. I think a lot of people are going to want to see this team at number 1 or at number 2, and I think basically almost everybody's going to have either FlyQuest or Team Liquid at number 1. One of those two, and they come in at 3 and 4 for me. Again, this isn't exactly a power rankings. I think it is pretty likely that one of those two teams ends up being the best in the NACL. I just don't know if they have the highest floors of any of the teams in the NACL, and I really do believe in the other two teams that we haven't gone over just yet, and so, we'll get to them in a second, but let's talk about FlyQuest. This is a pretty fun team. I think obviously you've got a couple veterans on this team, quote-unquote veterans. You really have one veteran on this team. You have 2 players that have really dominated Tier 2 for a little while. You have a player who's been very active in the LCK for a little while, and a player who's making his Tier 2 debut. I've been seeing a lot of people call Quad a rookie in the same way that Roamer is a rookie. That's just not the case. Quad has played significantly more top-level League of Legends than Roamer, or than a lot of other people seem to be giving him credit for. This is a player, I finally have some reason to share my expertise in the LCK. As somebody who watches the LCK every single week, covers it on this channel, Quad's been playing for a long time, and he's been at a top level for a long time. He was on, one of my favorite teams of all time, 2022 Spring DRX, that roster. Obviously, he wasn't going by Quad back then, but this is a player who's certainly been around the block a bit. He played in the LCK last year as a starter, and so, there's a lot to say about this team in terms of, what their upside could be, because these players are good, but, you know, there's also some concerns because I actually think this team might even be more volatile than what Team Liquid is, just in a different way. So let's talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Surdy in the top lane, Shaden in the jungle, Quad in the mid lane, Sajed at AD carry, and Chime at support. I'm really excited to see a couple of these players end up playing. You've got a couple LCS demotions, players who were supposedly going to be on LCS teams this split, and, you know, Evil Geniuses ended up pulling out. Both Surdy and Shaden were announced as starters for that Evil Geniuses LCS roster before the league contracted to 8 teams. That means that they're LCS caliber. I don't care what anybody says. I know my rankings are a little maybe surprising for them, but to me, this is where they are. Surdy is going to come in at number 2 for me. I really wanted to put him at number 1, and I truly do believe that, you know, probably on day 1, he's going to be number 1, but there's another top laner that I just value incredibly highly who's coming back into the league. You probably know who it is. That is going to be ranked a bit above him, but Surdy is a monster. He's been a channel darling before. I was so active in talking about Surdy when he was on what was it, Team Liquid First in Spring Split, when he was just carrying that team game after game after game. Basically, every single game that they won was off the back of him just dominating the top side, and then he didn't have a roster in the Summer Split, and I was like, this is a disaster. This sucks. Soul ends up, you know, pulling out of Evil Geniuses. They need a top laner. Surdy's played in the system before, obviously, had played for them in 2022, so he comes in Summer, and he kills it. Again, he continues to be one of the best top laners. I was so high on him. He was almost an all-pro, you know, a first team, you know, all NACL player for me, if you will, even on an awful Team Liquid first team in spring, and he was very narrowly like that, again, having played half a split in summer. That's how good Surdy is. This is a massive acquisition. They're going to be very happy with him. And then you've got Shaden. He's the other player in the jungle. Now, this is maybe where I'm a bit more pessimistic, is that Shaden is a lot more inconsistent than I think people give him credit for. He's obviously a really good player, and, you know, the peak of what we've seen out of Shaden has looked amazing. That time on Cloud9 was really good, but he wasn't very good in the NACL last year. He had a lot of good moments. I don't want to take that away from him. If you looked at a highlight package of Shaden from 2023, it would look really good, because a lot of the good plays, it's like, oh my god, this guy's just outplaying and outskilling a lot of people. But man, there were a lot of games where he just didn't show up. And he kind of suffers from a problem that a lot of junglers suffer from, but he suffers from it, I think, a bit more, where he's really good from ahead and really not good from behind. You do not want to lose pressure in the early game when you're playing with Shaden, because he's just not very good at knowing when to play passive, knowing when to take his foot off the gas in order to try to let the game scale up. It's just not really a style that I think he plays at a super high level. And so for me, he comes in at number 4. I think all top 3 of the junglers are really good. Keel being one of the people that comes in above him, and the last 2 that we haven't talked about coming in above him. I think Shaden's more inconsistent than the rest of them, which is why he comes in a bit lower. But man, his upside is number 1, and by a country mile. There's a reason Evil Geniuses wanted to build around him. And then the other veteran, quote-unquote, is Chime, coming back down to the NACL. He's been an LCS mainstay for TSM over the last few years, but couldn't find a job after, you know, TSM left and Shopify didn't end up wanting to extend him, so he's back in the NACL, but he's been a great LCS support. Maybe not great. Great might be a little rich, but he's been a really good LCS support. He was awesome in 2022 summer. That was the split where I think he really broke out as somebody who could be like a top-level support at an LCS level, and he was still really good throughout all of 2023. He was just not as dominant, I would say. He had some more bad performances, but, you know, the good performances were still there, and to me, he comes in as the number 1 support, at least at the start of the split, in the support position. I can't really see anything else. I think, honestly, to me, I do some overall calculations before I go into these videos. He actually ranks out as the number 1 player in the NACL in terms of current ability, not in terms of potential, but in terms of current ability in the NACL right now. I think that Chime is the most talented player in the NACL. To have that player here on FlyQuest, I think, is a major positive and will add really much needed stability to this team. And then you've got the younger quote-unquote players. We'll start with Quad, because again, I already talked about why he shouldn't really be considered a young player. He's just a volatile player. He's had a lot of experiences in the LCK, played for DRX in 2022, like I said, was pretty good for that team, was definitely somebody that started to win me over when he was playing for that team, ended up coming back last year for Nongshim, and, you know, in the summer split just wasn't all that good. They had to flip-flop, you know, between a bunch of mid laners. It wasn't him, so they had to go to Fiesta. It wasn't Fiesta, so they had to go to Call Me, and I think Call Me is the answer, but this is an LCK video. Quad is an interesting player, because there were, you know, if he had come over in 2021, I would have been like, yes, like, this is the guy. he's going to change your NACL franchise, and he's going to be a difference maker at the LCS level. Also, I just realized I've been saying 2022 DRX. It's 2021 DRX spring that I'm talking about, not 2022. That's the year they won Worlds. I don't know what I'm talking about. But he was a big part of that 2021 team, and I think if he had come over then, it would have been, a big deal. But he's really not had the best couple of years. It's really kind of gotten worse for him over the last few years. He became a streamer, and then he came back into pro for Nongshim, and, it's definitely going to be interesting to see if he can take the NACL by storm. I'm expecting a little bit more, growing pains from a player like Quad, especially with a player like Shaden in the jungle, who also is going to want a lot of resources. I certainly don't think this is going to be dominant from day one, but I think these two could grow together. And honestly, jungle mid is a big reason why this team is not going to end up in the top 2 for me, is because I just really don't know what you're going to get out of these two. I feel good about Surdy. I feel good about Chime. Shaden and Quad are going to have to be good, because Sajed in the AD carry position is a complete gamble. And I love this. I love that a big organization, a big team like FlyQuest is going for a player that's never played in Tier 2 in a pretty prominent role. It reminds me a lot of Masu from last year, and if they can hit again, that's ridiculous. But it's just hard for me to rank Sajed above a lot of these other players when he's never played in Tier 2. Again, he looked pretty good in Tier 3. There were a lot of really good moments. The mechanics are there. I think the mentality is there, but he's got a lot to clean up as well. He's certainly not a perfect prospect, and so he is going to come in at number 8 for now. That's another reason why I think this team's floor is relatively low, because if Sajed's just not dominant in the ADC role, then I think it could be a bit of a problem, and especially if Shaden and Quad take some time to get going, then it kind of just feels like a worse version of Evil Geniuses from last year, and that's not necessarily what you would want. But, I think there's upside for them to be significantly better than that. If Quad ends up dominating the league, if we get the best version of Shaden, and if they're right about Sajed, especially with Chime, who is going to do a really good job, I assume, of integrating him and getting him up to speed very quickly in the NACL. I mean, Surdy's a beast. Like, this could be a dominant team. This could be an easy championship winning roster. It's just, for me, there are a few more question marks than I have with the teams at the top 2, and I think, that might not be a popular opinion, but that's just where I'm at in terms of the confidence rankings. And then moving on to number 2 now, we get to our final 2 teams in the power rankings here, and it's kind of a surprise. I don't think a lot of people are going to have these 2 teams on top, but to me, these are the 2 best teams, at least in terms of floor, as I've said 1,000 times in this video up until this point, in the NACL. And coming in at number 2 for me, it is going to be Supernova. I am really, really excited about this team. A lot of people have been talking about them as this team with this high floor, low ceiling kind of expectations, that it's a bunch of boomers going up against a league full of zoomers, essentially, and you all have known quantities here. You know what you're going to get, but that might limit the amount of growth and potential that this team has. But I disagree. I think I agree in the fact that they do have a very high floor, that I would very much be surprised if this wasn't one of the 4 or so best teams in the league, even more so than like FlyQuest or Team Liquid, because I could see ways in which that team ends up busting a bit more than what Supernova has. But honestly, I think people are really underrating the upside of this team, specifically of the top side of the map, which is very good, but I think could be the best in the entire league by the end of the year if everything goes according to plan. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is obviously looking like Faisal in the top lane, Kenvi in the jungle, Shochi in the mid lane, Array at AD carry, and Diamond at support. A lot of these players have played in the LCS, 3 of the 5, if you will, with Kenvi, Array, and Diamond all having, small amounts of LCS time. Diamond and Kenvi obviously having pretty extended periods, but, a player in Shochi that was one of the best in the entire NACL last year. Faisal, who's been one of the best top laners ever since he really got that call up last year as well, and so I really trust this Supernova team, and I do think their upside is pretty ridiculous. Let's start with the bot lane, because I do think that they are the best example on this team of that high floor, almost low ceiling, but that high floor kind of known quantity thing that we were talking about earlier. We'll start with Diamond, because he is one of the players coming down from the LCS. Diamond's a really good player, and he's been a really good player for a while. Again, a lot went wrong on Dignitas last year. It's really hard for me to just look at Diamond and say it was entirely his fault, or that there was something he could have done to immediately make that team better. Obviously, Poom came in and was really good on that team, but I think Diamond's maybe more valuable individually. I just think there were so many issues on Dignitas last year that I almost want to throw out that tape. He was awesome in the NACL in the spring split when he got to play that entire split down there. Got to play a little bit with Tomo, we got to play a little bit with Spawn, and, that was really, really good. I just think it was a bad situation in the LCS that caused him to underperform. I expect him to come back to the NACL and continue to be one of, if not the best support in the entirety of the NACL. If Chime wasn't also coming down from the LCS, he probably would have been #1 on this list, and that's a pretty big endorsement. And then you have Array, who is just a very stable, very consistently good bot laner. Another player who last played in the NACL in the spring, but he was on that Golden Guardians Challengers team that ended up, obviously they didn't continue onwards as they went forward. We already talked about his lane partner in Prismal, who he's going to have to play against in the same role this year, but Array was really solid, and honestly, he showed a lot of growth over the course of that split. That team got better and better as the year went on, and that was mostly due to Young and Array becoming really competent carries in their own right. And Array has always been a pretty high floor player, but I think especially now, paired up with Diamond and with a strong top side of the map, I expect Array and Diamond to be a very stable, very strong bot lane. One of the best in the league every single week from week to week. I would expect this to be a strength of this team basically for the entirety of the year. And then you've got the other player coming down from the LCS in Kenvi coming into the jungle, and this is where some of my optimism is. Obviously, you can look at Faisal, Kenvi, and Shoji as completed products, but I honestly don't think that they are. I still think there's a lot of growth possible for all three of them, and in the sense that I think all three of them could become the best players in their roles within the first couple weeks of the season. Kenvi, I already have ranked really highly. Some people might want to see him ranked a lot lower because he really wasn't good in the LCS. He got a lot of opportunities on Immortals, and he just was never good for that team. He was consistently one of the weakest junglers in the entirety of the LCS, but a lot of that, to me, I can put, at least for now, on circumstance. The last time we saw Kenvi actually get resources and actually have a team around him that was relatively competent compared to the rest of the league, he was one of the best jungle prospects that North America has ever had in that 100 Thieves system. I think it's very possible that he could just get back to that very quickly into this, and I think a lot of the worries and concerns with Kenvi are just, it's still a wait-and-see thing. It's maybe the confidence is shot. Maybe a lot of the lessons that he learned on Immortals are going to be hard to break, and, maybe he's not going to be this good. But until I see that, I have to believe that the guy who dominated Tier 2 for so long can continue to dominate Tier 2 now that he has returned. And then you have Shochi in the mid lane. Talk about a channel darling. I mean, he is probably my favorite NACL player, and it genuinely is not because he comments on these videos sometimes. It is because when you watch him, you just understand how fun professional League of Legends can be. He is very lane dominant as a player, but obviously still a team-oriented guy. He can still, play these less aggressive, less, I guess, lane-oriented picks if he needs to. He's just a lot better when you give him the resources and give him the keys to be able to drive the ship. That's where he is at his best, and I honestly think this is a pretty good team to allow him to do that. Shochi, to me, at times was an MVP caliber player on Fear last year. Him and Perry had phenomenal chemistry. I think Kenvi's a relatively similar player to Perry, at least in terms of, skill level. They have different styles, but I think Kenvi is, at least comparable in terms of what he can accomplish, and I think these two are also going to have really good synergy, and if they have as good a synergy as Shochi and Perry had last year, he could be an MVP winner here in the NACL. I was begging teams to pick him up in the offseason. There were so many LCS teams that I think could have used an endemic North American mid laner, and Shochi was that guy for me. Going to be interesting to see if he can, keep that momentum up and continue to blow up in the way of becoming one of the best prospects in North America, like he is, quite frankly, on trajectory to do. And then you have Faisal in the top lane. Some people are going to see the number 4 ranking as incredibly disrespectful. I've seen basically unanimously number 1 rankings, and while I do like Faisal, I still think there are areas of the game that he needs to grow, and a lot of it is just game-to-game consistency things. This is something I talk about a lot on the channel, and typically where a lot of my differences come from consensus rankings is just I'm a little bit more of a stickler for game-to-game consistency, and Faisal is just not as good in bad matchups as maybe some of the top laners that I do have ranked above him. When he doesn't get counterpicked, or when he gets counterpicked, he doesn't survive nearly as unanimously. I think that, Fly put him on an island for most of the summer split, which certainly didn't help, but I didn't actually think his summer was as strong as his spring on Fear, where he really broke out as one of the more interesting and exciting top lane prospects in all of North America. I think it would take basically 1 or 2 games instantaneously for me to be back on the Faisal train. It really would be almost nothing for me to jump right on. I just want to exercise some caution in a role that I think has an incredible amount of talent at this point. So if Faisal, Kenvi, and Shochi are all number 1 by the end of the split, though, I'm not going to be surprised. That's the kind of topside, honestly, that I'm expecting, and that's why Supernova, to me, comes in at number 2. I think they're one of the 2 best teams in North American Challengers League right now. They're only behind the team that I think is the most stacked in the NACL, but they are darn close. Their floor is high, their ceiling is high. For a team that got relegated and had to get their way back in because Evil Geniuses ended up folding, it's a pretty darn good roster to end up putting together for the circumstances. And that's going to bring us to our number 1 team and the final one we get to talk about in today's video. And again, if you know all the teams, you know who's coming in at number 1. It's the content leaders themselves. It's Disguised. It's DSG coming in as my number 1 team in my preseason power rankings, in my floor rankings, my confidence rankings, whatever you want to consider this. I just would have a really hard time seeing this team be bad in any stretch. I think basically every player on this team is an incredibly talented player who's going to be leading their position in terms of, 2024 output, and all of them are LCS caliber. Like, this is an LCS team, and I know that we've kind of said that, like, Supernova's a bit of an LCS team. Even Fly and Team Liquid Challengers are, like, close to being, LCS teams. Team Liquid maybe a little closer. We'll see what ends up happening with FlyQuest. I have a few more concerns with them, but, DSG is really, like, genuinely a team where everybody here is, like, proven that they should be in the LCS, and I'm very excited to see what they can do in 2024. Their lineup is looking like Tenacity in the top lane, Perry in the jungle, Young in the mid lane, Manui at AD carry, and Poom at support. Gotta love what they were able to put together. DSG is trying to win. Obviously, we saw that last year. They came into the summer split. They put together one of the best rosters on paper. Took a little bit for things to get going, for things to get together, but they ended up as champions in the summer split. They are your defending champions, and to me, they should be favorites going into next year, even if that's not necessarily the opinion you're hearing from a lot of the other analysts. So let's talk about it. One player is returning here from last year, that being Young in the mid lane, and I like Young a lot. I was very much on the Young hype train in spring of last year when he was on Golden Guardians. It felt like he was actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting for that team early on in the spring split. Eventually, the bot lane really started to get strong. Array and Prismal both started to play at a really high level, and it became a much more complete team after that, but Young was really the stabilizing force early on, so much so that he actually got some LCS games at the beginning of last year, but he comes over to Disguised midway through the year, obviously in the summer split when Golden Guardians is no longer in the league, and he slots in very nicely. He was kind of their developmental player, I guess you could say. You brought him and Meech in. Those were the two players that you wanted to see develop alongside some, strong tier 2 staples in like Tomio and Fate God and Zazel and, these players who had a lot of experience. And Young, I think, showed a lot. He continued his growth trajectory, and now he's in that upper tier of mid laners in the NACL. Top 4 is all movable. I had Young at 3 at the start of this because I had Quad at 4 and I had Shochi at 2, and then I moved, Quad up to 2 because I think his floor is a little higher than I'm giving him credit for, and that means everybody moved down. But truly, like, 1 to 4 is all the same grade from me. They would all be getting the same grade. So looking at Young and saying 4 is way too low, then put him at number 1. Honestly, I can live with that. I absolutely can. That's how good I think he is going to be. And then you've got the top side of the map. We'll start with Tenacity, the other solo laner here. He is going to come in as my number 1 top laner. I get it. He didn't have a perfect stint on 100 Thieves in spring when he finally got called up to the LCS, but a lot of it was out of his realm. Like, he was forced to play tanks every game, and that's just not who Tenacity is. Like, I know he's not a bad tank player, but really you shouldn't be asking him to do that every game. I get it. You want to play towards Doublelift and Bjergsen, and that was always going to be what ended up happening on that team, but I think it hurt Tenacity more than it helped him, and he was getting better as the year went on. Not only was he getting more resources, but his tank play was getting a lot better, and I think, honestly, going back down to tier 2 here, I think he's going to stomp the rest of this league just like he was doing before he got called up. I would expect him to continue to be one of the single best players in the NACL, which is why he comes in as my number 1 top laner. And then you've got Perry in the jungle. I'm honestly shocked that it's not consensus that this guy is the number 1 jungler in the NACL right now. A lot of jungle talent ended up leaving the league. Players like Yuji and obviously Tomio, the former Disguised jungler here, they're all gone. Mir is gone. Like, the players that were better than Perry last year are all gone. They're not in the league right now. Perry's the best jungler in the league right now, at least in my eyes. He can just do everything. He's a great carry, and that's really what you're going to, bring him on for, is that he is probably the single best carry jungler in the NACL. If you need him to play a Kindred, if you need him to play something aggro like that, a Viego, he's going to be able to do it at a very high level. He's going to be one of the best players at that role, but he can facilitate. He's still a very high level, engaged tank player. We saw that in the playoffs when he was playing Sejuani a lot, and he did really well. I just think he's very versatile. He's another player that, I'm shocked didn't get an LCS offer this offseason, but, if he has another split, another year like he did last year on Fear, then it's only going to be a matter of time, just like I said, for players like Shochi and basically everybody else on this team. And so, really good to see Perry here. And then you've got the bot lane, Manui and Poom. Obviously, Manui kind of coming over with Perry over from Fear. the best thing I can say about Manui is that every single game he got better last year, and a lot of it to me seemed like confidence, which I think is really good because that's something that is, workable. His mechanics are never going to be a problem for him. He is talented enough to be one of the best AD carries in North America, period. He just has to believe in himself in that way, and especially because we saw that growth in his first year in the NACL, I'm honestly projecting a bit more, which is why he does come in as my number 3 AD carry. I think you're definitely going to find some people who put him lower than this, and I understand why you might want to put him lower, but I think he could be number 1 by the end of spring. I truly believe that's the trajectory that he's on, because I can't stress this enough. He got better every single game that they played. By the end of the year in the playoffs, he was an asset, a big asset towards that Fear team that really went on that 3rd place run, and so I think bringing him in here to DSG, you have a phenomenal surrounding core. He gets to play with a jungler that he already is comfortable with. It's a massive win for him, and I think for the team overall, and he gets to play with Poom, who has a ridiculous amount of LCS experience. And honestly, I tweeted this out when it was leaked that, or announced, I guess, by one of the Pokemon that Poom was going to be playing for DSG. This is the best thing that Poom can do, because honestly, it did feel a bit like he was overmatched at the LCS level during the back half of his CLG days, even during the Dignitas days when things were going a tad bit better. It just felt like he was maybe not as confident. It felt like he was making plays that weren't necessarily winning plays, and I think coming back down to tier 2, getting on one of the best organizations in a team that is expected to win a lot is probably the single best thing he can do for his career. I think getting back to those fundamentals, he essentially skipped over tier 2. He played a little bit of it, but remember, this guy was hot-shotted into the LCS by 100 Thieves, was eventually brought in by CLG because him and Luger were very good at this level, but I think getting back to the fundamentals, getting to play with a team full of people that he has never played with before, and, kind of reasserting himself as one of the best supports at this level is only going to help him. Honestly, it reminds me a lot of a player in Dokla that he was former teammates with. Dokla needed to come back down to tier 2 in order to reestablish, relearn some of those fundamentals and, get his confidence back, and he did that. He's back in the LCS as one of the best top laners. I think something similar could happen to Poom. I actually see this as a really good move, and I see this as a really good team. I don't see a lot of people putting DSG at number 1, but for me, this is the most complete team in the NACL on paper heading into the year. I would be surprised if this team failed really in any capacity, and if I had to make an expectation, I would actually think that they are going to be the spring split champions in the NACL. Alright, but that is going to do it for my NACL 2024 Spring Split Primer and Power Rankings, or more like Confidence Rankings video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Obviously, don't take anything I said in here too seriously. I know I really pride myself on a lot of the work and research that we do going into these videos, but for the NACL, really the hope is that I get this wrong. The hope is that these players continue to develop and that they show more than they did last year. This is just my thoughts and opinions on what we have seen from them so far. That's why I stay away from calling these predictions or anything like that, because you would hope that these end up being wrong. You would hope that these players end up changing and growing and developing throughout the year, that every team would end up being competitive and every player would end up being good in some way. That's kind of the hope. And so, obviously if you're upset about something in this video, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong just as much as anybody else. And so, with all that said, I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content. It does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only cover the NACL on this channel. We cover all 4 of the major regions as well: LCS, LEC, LCK, and LPL every single week. LEC Week 1 recap is already out. The primers on the LCS and the LCK are also available, and later on in this weekend, the LPL primer is also going to come out. With the seasons starting everywhere, it is time to dig in. So if you're a big League of Legends fan, you want to know more about esports as a whole, this is the place to do it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.